Welcome to A Spirited Take. My name is Tom Dickelman. I'm here along with Sean Miller and Matt Duar. A Spirited Take considers the great questions of life and faith, and it's available on both video and podcast formats. It's produced by the Community Church of Lake Forest and Lake Bluff and the Center for Innovative Ministry. So we're going to jump right in. M. Scott Peck's classic, The Road Less Traveled, begins with this three-word sentence. Life is difficult. Now, as we end the year 2020, it seems like life is difficult is the understatement of the century. There's coronavirus, there's a contentious upcoming election, there's racial tension and justice issues throughout the United States. There are looming questions about the economy moving forward. Wildfires have ravaged the West Coast, and we have moms and dads and grandparents and others all trying to figure out how to do education for their children. The question we begin with today for Matt and Sean is, how do you keep it together in these incredibly trying and challenging times? Matt, Sean?
Matt, you get to go first on that easy question.
All right, I'll take it from here. I think when we look at COVID in particular, it's important to recognize why this is so stressful, because I think that helps us then better understand what it is we need to do to move forward. If you were to create a rubric for how to just absolutely debilitate someone with stress, you would pose an imminent threat to their health and well-being. You would take away their sense of control. You would give them a perception of things worsening. You would give them an indeterminate time frame for how long it's going to last. Studies with just people going to the dentist have shown that for the same procedure with two groups, the group that was told how long it would last versus the group that was not told, the group that was told how long the procedure would last reported that it was no big deal. The other group reported that it was actually miserable and very painful, etc., even though it was the exact same procedure for the exact same amount of time. So we want to know when there's an end, which we don't. And then last, and I think most importantly, is one of nature's best ways for helping us offset stress is social connection. And here we find ourselves in the midst of a situation where social interaction physically is the biggest threat. And so we've lost this inborn, innate tool that helps us self-regulate when we're stressed, because that is the very danger. And so I just think it's really important. I'm rambling here. I'm going on and on and on.
No, it's fine. That's why we love you, Matt. It's fine. So what you're really saying is the components or the elements of coronavirus, even by itself, is really a perfect recipe for stress and anxiety.
It's a perfect recipe for stress and anxiety. And I think the biggest issue that I've seen is that people are not understanding that they're allowing temporary lifestyle adjustments to become permanent lifestyle habits. And I think that's a huge problem.
Well, tell me what you mean by that.
Because we have all of these things up in the air and we've lost our sense of normalcy, we're kind of living in a holding pattern. And when you live in a holding pattern, you might allow yourself to fall into certain habits that aren't necessarily good. And you tell yourself that it's okay because when things go back to normal, you'll stop going to bed later, waking up later, eating certain things, exercising less, not connecting socially, or finding new ways to connect socially.
So all these things are just making people even more and more stressed, and when we come out of this, it will be more challenging or difficult for them to step out.
For sure, because they're living off their heels a little bit. And I think one of the things that research shows is that when we are moving forward, when we have a forward life momentum, we deal with stress better. And too many of us are living off of our heels, and we're not adjusting our goals. Maybe we can't plan out 6 months or a year like we could before, but we still can plan out at the end of the week or the end of the month, and then work backwards from goals that are meaningful for us, and work backwards and create a meaningful daily schedule. And as long as we're moving forward and achieving things that we find to be valuable on a day-to-day basis, that puts us in a much better place to deal with stress rather than just waiting.
So you would recommend to people during this pandemic time and with all the other challenges that taking things one day at a time or 1 week at a time and creating specific goals for that day or for that week as a way to address the challenge of coronavirus in these difficult times?
Absolutely. And so that's the first thing, is if you don't know what your larger life objectives are, then this is a wonderful opportunity to sit down and consider what they are. And once you have that, then you say, well, what can I do in the next month to move the needle towards those outcomes that I want? What do I want to be able to do and feel that I can't necessarily do and feel right now? And how can I work on building that and cultivating that over the next month? And then break that down into a weekly and daily set of routines, rituals, or behaviors.
Right. Sean, in your experience as a minister, what's your sense of how people are doing right now?
Well, that's a good question. I've been thinking about your other question too, about what am I doing to keep it together? And I'm not sure what I'm doing to keep it together. I might be leaning into the fact that I'm just kind of like everybody else, struggling to keep it together. Because that list you gave at the beginning, at the top of the show, from fires to the virus to the economy, any one of those things could keep any of us up at night. And so one of the things that I try to do every day is to realize that it's okay not to be okay. These are tough times. These are stressful times. And from a sort of a pastoral care minister perspective, to take care of your soul is to realize that when you're not okay, you don't have to be anything else but that today. And that might sound simple, or it might sound in some ways easy, but I think actually it's more important to tend to your soul than to tend to your schedule that you used to have 6 months ago that's been blown up by everything that you listed at the top of the show. I think people are trying to put on a brave face. I try to put on a brave face. But I think it's getting harder and harder as things continue to roll on to put on a mask that says everything's okay, because we know it's not. And I think the magic in these moments is when we say to each other, when we say to ourselves, it's okay not to be okay.
Right. How do you encourage people to have a good attitude in these times? You know, I know that the classic Monty Python song, Always Looking in the Bright Side, is pretty hard to embrace these days. Yet I've heard others say that attitude is really the ticket in some ways to all this. How do you encourage people to have a good attitude?
Well, I like some of the things that Matt was saying about setting goals and then achieving those goals, and I would add to that, only sort of to amplify that, to then celebrate the victories. Because I think we can be in the muck of all the things that aren't going well, but to celebrate what is going well is equally important. So at the end of the day or at the end of the week, to check something off the list, or to just celebrate the fact that you felt good today and your kids did a good job on Zoom today and that you didn't lose your mind today. I think the point is to celebrate what is going well. And those celebrations lead to more celebrations. And the attitude of needing to celebrate what's going well can overcome the fact that so many big things in the world seem not to go well, when the little things are, those little things, those little mustard seeds become really, really meaningful, I think, in our lives.
Matt, you live your life in the educational world. Have there been victories or successes or important lessons amidst all the challenges that you and your fellow educators and students and administrators have faced?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we're able to, I said to someone, I think it was yesterday, that it's so strange how I have to be reminded how weird things are. Because, at least for me personally, in many ways I've become used to this new normal. And I forget how not normal the current situation is. And that goes with my job as well. I mean, personally, I was a teacher who was, I don't want to say anti-technology, but I was, as the well-being coordinator for the school, I was definitely emphasized the relational aspects of teaching. And so I tried to use technology very little in my classroom. And that put me at a real deficit for when we went into remote learning. And so the fact that just, 5-6 months from when all this started, the fact that I'm able to participate in a classroom experience that's entirely virtual, do assignments, assessments, group work, all these things. I never thought in a million years that I would be able to utilize technology as skillfully as I can now, and nor did my students think that they could engage in an entire school day and school week and a school month doing all remote learning. And I know I have many colleagues who are in the same boat. So it's actually pretty remarkable that the whole enterprise of education has adapted so quickly to this new format. And I do think it is something, as Sean was saying, to celebrate, not because this is where we want to end up. We all want to be back in the building, but the fact that we've been able to do what we've done in the amount of time that we've done it, I think is really remarkable.
Yeah. It's been said that dark times brings the greatest growth in our lives, and these certainly are dark times. Are there opportunities, or what are the opportunities for spiritual growth in these dark and challenging times? Sean, any thoughts on that?
As someone who draws upon the Christian tradition, the practice of faith, and I mean, truly, if we look at the stories, just take the stories of Jesus, he tends to not talk to us about when things are bright and shiny and easy. In fact, most of the New Testament, I think I would make a pretty good argument, is built out of faith that comes from either a wilderness time or a difficult time or a challenging time or a time of suffering. Faith doesn't come from when things are easy. In fact, we sort of know that we have to hit a kind of rock bottom to remember who we are and whose we are. So for me, the spiritual life is, this is such a rich time to, in some ways, go back to the basics. Faith is a gift that comes from the knowledge that we can't do everything on our own. And if there is there's never been a time like the one we're in to realize that we need help and we need support.
One of the things that strikes me about opportunities in these COVID times is that the spiritual practice of service and serving others, with so many people in need, there are extraordinary opportunities for service. This past year, a woman in our church who owns a restaurant was in a place where restaurants are having difficult times, and she created an idea, a concept, where she utilized her restaurant and the resources that they had, and to provide meals for people just north of where our church is who are hungry. And over the last few months, we've helped her provide over 3,000 meals to people who hunger. Now, the food part of it was important, but the feedback we receive is those people who are struggling economically and otherwise, just knowing that their neighbors a few miles to the south are thinking of them, praying for them, and care for them is what mattered so much to them. And the beauty of it, it was one of those win-win sort of situations where not only were people being being fed rather, but we developed this partnership and enhanced that. And also people in a restaurant were able to keep their jobs. So it's a wonderful time for creative thinking as well as service. I also think that it's a time to rethink structures. In the United States right now, churches continue to struggle and are dying at a rapid pace, and churches tend to have as their goal hanging on to the past. And they don't have cultures or systems or structures that allow them to respond swiftly to the current situation. Happily, our church really has no bureaucracy, and so we can kind of turn on a dime. And when the weather got nicer this past spring, and we moved outside and started holding outdoor services, for the first 3 weeks, I'd get calls from the other ministers in town and in the area asking how it went. And I'm like, well, it was pretty easy. We called the people in the village. We said, can we use the park? They said, go for it. Just make sure you're socially distanced and everybody wears masks, and it should be no problem at all. And we did that. And I'd get a call from the other ministers, well, how did it go? How did it go? And the response was, well, it was fine. Now, why aren't you guys outside? And the typical response was, well, we still are waiting for our board to decide, or we have a couple task forces looking at the issue of reconvening our services, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think in a world that continues to change more quickly and more rapidly all the time, it makes sense to rethink how our structures either facilitate our health or really impede it, whether that's churches or educational institutions, et cetera, et cetera. Sean, you made a couple more questions or thoughts, and then we'll wrap things up. You made a statement to me the other day, or you asked a question, and you said, what is it that's making you come alive today? Which is such a great question for anybody who's out there struggling with where they are or how they're feeling about things. Do you have a thought or two to share from your standpoint on why that's such a valuable question to ask?
Well, there's two things I like about the question. One is the word alive, and one is the word today. And in such an anxious time where we don't know what the future is going to be about, having the word today in that question is really important to me. Because what is making me come alive today may not be what makes me come alive next week. And that's sort of the beauty of where we are if we really stay attuned to our aliveness. And what it is to be alive is different than what it is to just kind of be living. And there's a difference. There's a difference when your heart sings to just going through a routine. And again, the opportunities in this season are because we don't have routines we used to. We can't rely on the old structures and the old structures in life. So the things that make me come alive today are opportunities like this, where I've never thought in a million years I'd be sitting and doing a YouTube show, connecting with people online. And that's an amazing gift that I have to be part of this group and to be part of the community church. And to celebrate that. Things that make me come alive today are very different than what they were a year ago, and I'm grateful. I'm really actually very, very grateful for that.
Well said. Matt, what's helping you feel alive right now?
Anytime I feel that I'm becoming a little bit existentially numb, I always turn to two things, and usually in unison. exercise and nature. Just getting outside and moving my body in a natural space always seems to bring me back to where I need to be. And it helps me orient myself to my life in a way where one of the things about being tired or stressed is that you are more likely to move into lower brain functioning, right? And when you do that, you lose perspective on your life. You lose that 30,000-foot view of who you are and why you're living and what inspires you. And I honestly don't know of any practice more effective, for at least for myself personally, in restoring that perspective than exercising, running in particular, out in nature. It just seems to just bring everything back into alignment. And so I often recommend to people that if you're feeling a little, I don't know, kind of like you're just dragging along, or your life seems dull or not vivid, get outside, move, breathe fresh air, and usually good things happen.
It's something that you have control over, you know, the ability and the opportunity to be outside. I read a quote recently in Forbes, which I think is worth reading, and it speaks to the issue of control. As such, the virus shows us that no matter how well planned and organized we are, and no matter how much we live in the Anthropocene, the era characterized by significant human impact, we are not, we are not in control. One simple virus is disrupting everything. This offers a great opportunity. In almost every aspect of life, we want to be in control. Whether it is health, airline safety, or our calendars, we live in this illusion that full control is possible. The virus can help us create awareness that this is not the case. It provides an opportunity to take a more modest role and accept that many things are simply beyond our control. End quote. And I think it's a really wonderfully worded reminder in our lives, and it fits with what you've just shared. There are certain things that we can control and do, and but at the end of the day, we need to recognize in the way that this virus has knocked the entirety of this world on its ear, that ultimately we don't have control.
Tom,
Gentlemen,
Tom,
yes, please.
I just want to say one thing. One of the like core messages when I used to teach a class called Wellness for Life for freshmen is I would say, if you don't remember anything from this entire school year, remember this one line, that your quality of life is in proportion to the amount of time you spend paying attention to things within your control. Because 99% of your life is outside of your control, but the 1% that is within your control determines 99% of your quality of life. And it's these little actionable things that we overlook on a daily basis, like the food that we eat, our physical activity and movement patterns, the way we connect to other human beings. These small little seemingly incidental things that we would discard as being, oh, that's not that important to my subjective experience and subjective well-being, when in fact the entirety of your subjective well-being is composed of the aggregate of all these small little behaviors that are absolutely within your control. So it's really important to always be focusing on what things are actually actionable, and what, as that article or that quote that you just read, what things are outside of our control, and just letting those things go.
Well said. Thank you. Sean, a final thought for the good of the cause?
You know, one thing that makes me come alive is not being in control, and that's kind of a paradox sort of statement, but I think that's true, and that gives me actually a lot to think about, having heard what you just read. So that sort of is the essence of faith for me.
Sean, Matt, thank you both very much. And friends, we'll look forward to seeing you again soon on A Spirited Take.